Welcome everyone, that is everyone in APUSH, to our next YouTube lecture, number 9. You'll notice we're in a new period. We're in period 5, 1844 to 1877. This time period will cover everything all the events that will lead up to the Civil War itself that begins in 1861, and the aftermath, which is known as the Reconstruction era, from 1865 to 1877. This lecture is entitled The 1850s and the Collapse of Compromise. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the key concepts as far as talking about it here in the video, so take a look at them. Make sure you note which ones will go along with this video as you listen to the information that is the content that you need to know as well. So between 1844 and 1877, the United States has now become a continental nation. And they did this by fighting and winning 3 wars, ones with Mexico, the Civil War, and a war with the Indians, and creating a stronger central government. In the 1840s, it took over much of Western North America through diplomatic negotiations with Great Britain and a war of conquest with Mexico, which we'll discuss in depth in class. This geographic expansion sharpened political conflicts between what are the free states and the slave states, and eventually this is what led to the South's secession and the advent of the Civil War in 1861. Now, after his victory in the Mexican-American War, President James K. Polk will decide not to seek a 3rd term. However, a conflict over slavery was brewing in the form of the Wilmot Proviso. This was a bill that was introduced to Congress that proposed that any land acquired from Mexico during the war would remain free land, no slaves. This conflict over slavery eventually would take its toll on the Whig and Democratic Party. In 1848, in this election, again, Polk is not going to run a 2nd term. The Democrats will instead nominate Senator Lewis Cass, an avid expansionist. To try to maintain party unity on the slavery issue, Cass and the Democrats will introduce a new idea, popular sovereignty, legislation that would allow settlers of a territory to determine its status as either a free state or a slave state. In other words, in the territory, you could vote if your state enters the Union free or slave. This doctrine of popular sovereignty, however, will fail to win over Northern Democrats. And a free soil party is now going to be formed, and they will nominate Martin Van Buren as their candidate for president. The Whigs will turn to General Zachary Taylor, the hero of the Mexican War, a Louisiana slave owner himself who firmly committed himself to the defense of slavery in the South, however, but not in the Western territories. Old Rough and Ready, as he was known, won the election for the Whigs, giving them their 2nd and last presidential election win. Now, all this should have been fine for Taylor's term in office. He should have had an easy term in office until something both awesome and terrible will be discovered. Gold. Gold will be discovered in California in January of 1848 at Sutter's Mill. This would lead to the famous 1849 gold rush, and left California in truly an awful position with thousands of unwelcome migrants coming every day. With this rapid settlement, Taylor, hoping to bypass the slavery issue, asked California to skip territorial process and immediately apply for statehood, which California does, but as a free state. This will now set off a major chain of events that will almost thrust the nation into civil war. The North is becoming more and more concerned about a free soil movement, a free labor market movement, as it were. This in turn will compel the South to hold on and to fight for their thoughts about slavery and why it is actually a positive social good. Tension would begin to mount until the Compromise of 1850 would come along. We will have the North and the South will have to come together and actually compromise over this issue of slavery. This will be the last time you'll see men like Henry Clay John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster worked together for the good of the nation to try to avert civil war. More of this Compromise of 1850 will be discussed in class, but it also introduced us a newcomer in William Seward from the North. Oh, and Zachary Taylor does something very important. Okay, well, yes, he does do something actually very important for the compromise. Well, he dies. Spoiler alert. We'll talk, like I said, more about this in class, but the Compromise of 1850 will help the United States avert war. It is Henry Clay's final moment as a leader of the United States. We'll move forward to the election of 1852. We now see a split in both major parties and an end of the two-party system. The Democrats will run yet another dark horse and unknown candidate with Franklin Pierce, while the Whigs try another war hero, General Winfield Scott. Franklin himself was also a war hero he was a general, let's say that. He was a general in the Mexican-American War, known as the fainting general, because while looking over the troops, he was in parade formation on his horse. His horse, startled, jumped up real fast. He pulled a groin muscle. The pain was so terrible, he fainted off his horse. Something he would never really be able to live down. However, Franklin was a compromise candidate for the Democrats, and he winds up winning the election. As president, Franklin Pierce will pursue an expansionist foreign policy, the first of its kind. To assist northern merchants, he will dispatch Commodore Matthew Perry, not that Perry of Friends, to Japan in open trade. To pacify southern expansionists, he will send James Gadsden to Mexico and purchase extensive land from the country to help build a railroad for the South. This became known famously as the Gadsden Purchase. His most controversial initiative, however, will be towards Cuba. Pierce overtly supported military expeditions in Cuba and arranged for American diplomats to compose what is known as the Onstad Manifesto. While Europe was embittered in a war, the Crimean War, they took this advantage to form a document that stated the U.S. would in fact take Cuba by force if necessary. However, this plan would be discovered and eventually denounced in Congress and never come to fruition. His biggest controversy, though, was yet to erupt. What is about to happen, what is known as the KansasNebraska Act. Stephen Douglas, a senator from Illinois, also known as the Little Giant because of his size, was wanting to open up land in the West to build a railroad that would connect Chicago to California. He introduced a bill that originally was to deny American Indians their rights to the Western lands, but this was actually attacked by Southern Democrats because they were now wanting to extend slavery into the Western territories. Douglas would revise this bill, calling for a split of the Western lands, Nebraska in the north and Kansas in the south. This Kansas-Nebraska bill would also repeal the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The bill passed, and Franklin Pierce would sign into law, thus basically starting the Civil War. Both Southern and Northern elements saw a chance to make Kansas into the image of an America that they wanted. This set off mass migration of settlers from both regions. Eventually, things came to a head, and a shooting war will begin in the 1850s. Hundreds will be massacred, all in the name of slavery. Kansas becomes known as Bleeding Kansas. Multiple parties will now form in the United States. Everything from the Know Nothing Party, which is an anti-immigrant party, the Free Soilers, and finally in 1854 we see the formation of the brand new Republican Party, a coalition that was made up of different elements, supporters of the middle class, which is a Jeffersonian ideal, and a group of people who simply want to stop the expansion of slavery. The Whig Party will ultimately fall apart and fade into history. This leads us to the election now of 1856. 1856 saw the Democrats turn to a new candidate, James Buchanan, who was known as Kansas Less because he was not in the country when this took place. His election, though, will only make matters even worse. At the time of his campaign, a former slave, Dred Scott, has sued for the right to be free. Having lived in Illinois and the territory of Wisconsin, once Dred's master had died, he felt that living on free soil, Illinois and Wisconsin, would qualify him for his freedom. The Supreme Court will not only disagree, but decide to make slavery the law of the land. Roger Taney, yes, that Roger Taney, Andrew Jackson's former Secretary of the Treasury, ruled first that blacks, whether free or slave, could not sue since they were not citizens. They were not enfranchised. But he also ruled that the Fifth Amendment protected all property, since the government could not take property without due process, thereby stating that Congress had no constitutional right to prevent Southern citizens from carrying slave property anywhere in the Union. Taney then also declared that the old Northwest Ordinance and the Missouri Compromise were unconstitutional. Buchanan not only supports this decision, but orders one of the northern judges from Pennsylvania to side with the southern judges. This, by the way, is an impeachable act. This event will then open the door for the new Republican Party and the rise of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln first comes to prominence with his famous debates for the Illinois State Senate race against Stephen Douglas. His House divided speech versus the Freeport Doctrine. The Freeport Doctrine was Stephen Douglas thought that he didn't care if slavery was voted up or voted down, so long as citizens had the right to vote. Where Lincoln countered with the fact that the nation cannot survive half slave or half free. In the end, Douglas won the debates and became won his second or third term in the Senate for the state of Illinois. Though Lincoln will lose, he will be considered a candidate now for president in 1860, with the Democratic Party divided between four men that will run for president, and even though Lincoln's name will not even appear on a single ballot, Abraham Lincoln will still win this election. He will be America's first minority president, only garnering less than 40% of the popular vote. But we can see now that the country has become completely split through the 1850s between slave and free. Now with this new party, this Republican Party, the South will see its only opportunity in secession, and a civil war will now begin. So this ends this video. Let me know in your comments if you felt like the timing on this was good and it was easy enough to follow along with your key concepts. Bye-bye now.